بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم اللهم افتح علينا فتوح العارفين ووفقنا توفيق الصالحين وانفعنا بالقرآن والذكر الحكيم اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا بما ينفعنا وزدنا علما يقربنا منك برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت يا حي يا قيوم تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا سهلا اللهم أعذنا من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا وأصلح لنا شأننا كله لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعد فقال المؤلف الإمام النووي رحمه الله ونفعنا به وبكم الحديث الثالث عن أبي عبد الرحمن عبد الله بن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنهما قال سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول بني الإسلام على خمس شهادة أن لا إله إلا الله وأن محمدا رسول الله وإقام الصلاة وإيتاء الزكاة وحج البيت وصوم رمضان رواه البخاري ومسلم. So third hadith of Imaam an-Nawawi narrated by Abdullah ibn Umar. Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Islam is built upon five. Islam is built upon five. And of course these are the five pillars that people are very familiar with and even children are familiar with. The Shahada, that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is messenger of Allah. The establishing of the prayer, giving of zakat, the Hajj, and the fasting of Ramadan. So these are the foundations of this deen, because if a building is built upon pillars, if the pillars are not there, then the building collapses. So in other words, there's no Islam without these five pillars. And as I mentioned yesterday, all five of these are actually actions, including Shahada, because it's by the tongue. Iman in the belief is the next stage, which we mentioned. What is Iman? As the Quran made very clear in Surah Al-Hujurat and other places, Islam and Iman are two different things. So Islam is to take the physical Shahada, I bear witness. But the person may not have Iman. The most important of these five pillars after the Shahada is the prayer. That's the most important. As the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in another Sahih Hadith, which actually comes later in the book as well, Ra'sul Amr al-Islam wa amuduhu as-salah wa dhirwatu sanamihi al-jihad. The Prophet ﷺ in another hadith said, Ra'sul Amr, the main matter is Islam. The main matter is Islam. Wa amuduhu as-salah, the pillar of it is Salah. So there he put the one pillar. So here's the five pillars, but if we put it down to the most important, it's the Salah. Amuduhu as-salah. Wa dhirwatu sanamihi al-jihad, the highest peak of it is jihad. The highest peak of it is jihad. I don't think we'll get up to that. That hadith is quite later on, so we can just quickly mention something about that now. Shows us very clearly, there's different stages and different levels in people's Islam. The basic foundation is the Salah, the 5 daily prayers. And the highest peak is jihad, meaning, what's the meaning of jihad? Is to sacrifice your wealth and your life in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It says in the Quran, تُجَاهِدُونَ بِأَمْوَالِكُمْ وَأَنفُسِكُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. You struggle and strive with your wealth and your lives in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the highest peak. of where Islam will take us if we take Islam in its true sense. If we take Islam as a total teaching, not simply as something we do on the side or just something we do due to our culture. If we take on Islam, like I mentioned before in the previous classes, the aspect of the first things that the Quran was saying was feed the poor, take care of the orphans, in other words, take care of the weak and oppressed in the society. In other words, have justice amongst your society, have justice, social justice. This requires this jihad. And that's the true and ultimate meaning of human being. If this was not the highest cause of the human being, then all of the prophets and messengers would not have been given this task. What was the job of all of the prophets and messengers that came into the earth? Well, we don't have to look far because we read it in the Quran every day. What is the Quran full of? Stories of previous prophets and messengers. Why? It's there for a reason. It's not there as just a story about what happened in the past. It's there for a reason, because the Quran itself, Allah says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. It's a huda, it's a guidance. The Quran is not just stories about what happened in the past. The Quran is a guidance for people of taqwa. So only people of taqwa will be able to receive the guidance. Only people of taqwa will be able to receive the full guidance that is contained within the Quran. So to really benefit from the Quran and to get the knowledge from the Quran, we have to work on our taqwa. When we work on our taqwa, then we read the Quran, we will get the guidance from the Quran. Hudan lil muttaqeen. It's not Hudan lil muslimin. It's Hudan lil muttaqeen, the people that have gone from the stage of Islam to Iman to Ihsan. People of taqwa. So what did the prophets do? Their job was this is what we call jihad. They were struggling in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the struggle can take different stages. In Mecca, the Prophet ﷺ and the Sahaba, their struggle was a struggle of the word. It was a struggle of the word. And there's no doubt that some surahs of Quran which were revealed in Mecca referred to that struggle as jihad. Some of the early surahs that you can check in the tafsir that were revealed in Mecca, and they referred to that struggle as jihad. So that was jihad of the tongue. That was jihad of telling the corrupt society what was happening that was wrong in that society. And that there can come a stage in specific circumstances where the jihad becomes one also of the sword, which took place in Medina and the Prophet ﷺ. So we shouldn't really, we shouldn't be embarrassed or apologetic about the concept of jihad. We can't let the non-Muslims define our deen for us. We can't let them, make this word jihad into a negative term, because jihad is a very positive term. As the Prophet ﷺ said, وَذِرْوَةُ سَنَامِهِ الْجِهَادِ. This is the highest peak of the deen. And the Quran talks about those who struggle and strive in his path, in many, many ayahs of Quran, with their wealth and their lives. So just because, Muslims now we're in a weak situation, and non-Muslims are always attacking our deen, and particularly attacking this doctrine of jihad, because since the time of colonialism, this was the thing that they realized was a big problem for them. The Muslims have got this doctrine, this teaching, which is called jihad, that they're willing to sacrifice their wealth, their lives, everything for the sake of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the attacks against that started back then and continue until today. So that, but we can't let them define our terms for us. So these are the pillars. So the amuduhu as-salah. So the salah is the actual pillar. So before we try to jump onto the peak, to the highest level, let's make sure we have got the foundation in place. How are we establishing the prayer? How are we establishing the prayer? And I'm sure everyone in this gathering is people who are establishing the prayer, because that's why you're sitting here. But then we have to think about the other Muslims around us, in our families, in our extended families, our neighborhoods, our communities. We have to think about those Muslims. Are they establishing the prayer? If not, then it's our responsibility to make that jihad of the word, the da'wah, that all the prophets were given that task. If there was any better work to be done, the prophets would have been given that work. There's no higher calling, there's no better, more noble profession, no noble thing to do than to go and invite people to obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's our responsibility as the final chosen ummah, the ummah of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, the importance of prayer, we can't underestimate. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in another hadith, Al-ahdu bayni wa baynakum as-salah. The covenant, the promise, the binding tie between me and you is the salah. فَمَنْ تَرَكَهُ فَقَدْ كَفَرَ. Whoever leaves it has fallen into disbelief. So an extreme warning from the Prophet ﷺ about leaving the prayer, the 5 daily prayers. Now, of course, that hadith is not taken literally, that the person becomes a disbeliever, although that opinion was taken by a small minority of scholars. They took that hadith literally, that someone who doesn't pray, their fard prayer, they would actually become a non-believer. But according to the vast majority, no, you don't become a disbeliever by doing any sinful act. So in other words, the person will still be, janazah will still be prayed for the person, they're still buried amongst the Muslims, even if they didn't pray. So there's a small minority of scholars who were Ahl-Sunnah wal Jama'ah scholars, took it literally, so the person is actually not Muslim who is not praying. But that just shows us the importance of the prayer, how it's fundamental to our deen. Like when, you probably know, when Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu was the Khalifa, and some of the tribes around Arabia, they rebelled, because now the Prophet ﷺ had passed away. They rebelled. They felt that, and one of the things, some of them, they left totally Islam. Some of them said, no, we remain Muslim, but we refuse to pay the zakat. We refuse to pay zakat to Medina. And as you know, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, one of the great stances that he took, he said, no, I will fight them with the sword. I will fight them if they refuse to pay zakat. Even though the other Sahaba, great Sahaba, including Sayyidina Umar, were advising him not to fight them at that time, because they felt Muslims are too weak right now in Medina. We shouldn't try to fight these wars. So Abu Bakr said, I will not divide between the zakah and the salah, or the salah and the zakah. In other words, the meaning there is that for the salah, if they leave the salah, we fight them. So if they leave zakat, I will also fight them, and I will take it with the sword. These things, and of course, I don't need to mention about the fasting in Ramadan. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. Fasting is prescribed to you as it was prescribed to those before you. So once again, fasting was something that was given to the Ummah before us as well, and it was given to this final community. Any question on that hadith, or should we move on to the next one?
between Salat and establishment of Salat.
In what way do you mean? Iqamah Salah?
Just prayers or establishment of Salat. This is a deeper word.
Iqamah Salah, as far as I understand, it means to establish the prayer, like to in other words, to pray, the fard prayer. I don't know if it has any other significance. I don't know what you're thinking of. Or do you mean wider establishment of Sharia or? Okay. Hadith al-Rabi'. عن أبي عبد الرحمن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه قال حدثنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو الصادق المصدوق إن أحدكم يجمع خلقه في بطن أمه 40 يوما نطفة ثم يكون علقة مثل ذلك ثم يكون مضغة مثل ذلك ثم يرسل إليه الملك فينفخ فيه الروح ويؤمر ب4 كلمات. So in this hadith, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, the great Sahabi, he says that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us, and he is the most truthful and trusted, that inna ahadakum yujma'u khalquhu fi batni ummihi, that each one of you, his creation takes place in the belly of his mother for 40 days as a nutfa, then for 40 days as a alaqa. So nutfa is a drop, and then for 40 days as alaqa. Alaqa is something that sticks. And then for the same period as a mudgha. And then the angel is sent, which breathes in the spirit, the ruh. And the angel is given 4 instructions. بِكَتْبِ رِزْقِهِ وَأَجَلِهِ وَعَمَلِهِ وَشَقِيٌّ أَوْ سَعِيدٌ. The angel is told 4 things to write down: the rizq that this person will receive in their life, when this person's life will end, what his actions will be during his life, and whether he will be happy or sad, meaning whether he will go to Jannah or Nar. All of these things are written at that time when the ruh is put into the belly, into the fetus. فوالله الذي لا إله غيره إن أحدكم ليعمل بعمل أهل الجنة حتى لا يكون بينه وبينها إلا ذراع فيسبق عليه الكتاب فيعمل بعمل أهل النار فيدخلها. Then the Prophet ﷺ explained further. He said, by Allah, other than whom there is no other God, one of you may do the actions of the people of Jannah until there is between him and Jannah only 1 zira', which is half an arm's length. Then the predestination or the decree that is written will overtake him, and he will start doing the actions of the people of the fire, and he will enter into the fire. وَإِنَّ أَحَدَكُمْ لَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ النَّارِ حَتَّى مَا يَكُونَ بَيْنَهُ وَبَيْنَهَا إِلَّا ذِرَاعٌ فَيَسْبِقُ عَلَيْهِ الْكِتَابُ فَيَعْمَلُ بِعَمَلِ أَهْلِ الْجَنَّةِ فَيَدْخُلُهَا. And conversely, one of you may be doing the actions of the people of the hellfire until there is only this much distance between him and the hellfire. Then he starts doing the actions of the people of Jannah, and he enters into Jannah. فَيَسْبِقُ عَلَيْهِ الْكِتَابُ, and then the thing that was written, his destiny, overtakes him. In other words, it was written for him that he would be from the fire. Rawahul Bukhari wa Muslim, narrated by Bukhari and Muslim, so being from the strongest category of hadith, because it's narrated by both Bukhari and Muslim. The only hadith that can be of a stronger category is one that is mutawatir, of which there are different estimates how many hadith are mutawatir, probably a few hundred altogether only. Hadith which are mutawatir, which mean they have been narrated by many different Sahaba, the same hadith, so it has absolutely no doubt of it, so it's of the strongest possible yaqeen. After that, a hadith which is narrated by Bukhari and Muslim is the strongest possible hadith. So, obviously, this hadith contains many points of knowledge. The first one is the aspect of the fetus. This hadith clearly says that the ruh, the soul, goes in after 120 days. 40, then 40, and then the ruh. So, this hadith actually resolves for us an issue that is quite problematic for some other religion like Christians who don't know when is the actual fetus considered to be a living human being. Because at 120 days when the ruh comes, that's when it becomes a human being. A full human being. The ruh is there. The ruh is the thing that gives life. If the ruh leaves the body no longer is alive. So this is why, I don't want to go into the fatwa or anything like that, hukams. But this is why, the scholars of Islam, they can, before 120 days, if there is extreme need for the pregnancy to be stopped, for example, for some reason, then they can be more lenient on that. But after 120 days, because now, it has the ruh, it becomes much more difficult, because then you're talking about another human life. Of course, I'm sure you're probably aware of, some of the scientists who have pointed out that this is quite amazing, the description given here, according to the knowledge of that time and the knowledge that we have now of how the fetus develops. And that medical doctor from France, Maurice Bucaille, who became Muslim, was actually because of some of these type of hadith and descriptions in the Quran about especially about the description of the fetus within the womb. Because he said, if you look at this, nutfa, then alaqa, exactly for that time period, if you look at it with a microscope inside the mother's womb, you see the tiny embryo sticking to the wall of the womb, literally sticking, like a alaqa. Alaqa means to stick, And then for that next 40 days, the description mudgha. Mudgha means like a piece of flesh. And if you look at the fetus, actually I think you still at that time you have to use a microscope. You see, it just looks like a tiny chewed up piece of flesh, and so on. And then with the ruh as well, they mention this is the time. This 120 days is when you first detect the heartbeat and some things like that as well. I don't keep so much up to date with that, but it's good for our iman, but it's not a proof for our deen. But it's good, it's good for our iman, because the Quran did say, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ لَوْ كَانَ مِنْ عِنْدِ غَيْرِ اللَّهِ لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Have they not thought deeply about the Quran? If it was from other than Allah, they would have found many discrepancies therein. Which is something to think about deeply. This Quran, which came down 1,400 years ago, until today, we can't find discrepancies in there. That's a That's a great miracle. A great miracle. With all of these scientific discoveries, all of the progress that human beings have made in the field of science and all other historical, archaeological evidence, all of these things, not one thing has come to contradict anything in the Quran. And that's what the Quran itself says. وَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. If it didn't come from Allah, they would have by now found so many discrepancies. How could a man living 1400 years ago, the Prophet ﷺ, just write all this book which proved that not even one thing has been disproved in it till today? It's just not possible. This is why Christianity fell apart. When Europe went into the scientific age, scientific revolution, Christianity fell apart because the Bible, they found so many discrepancies. There's still literalist followers of the Bible today who are so stubbornly clinging to things in the Bible which are absolutely proven false by modern knowledge. I met one of these guys when I was working in one of the hospitals where I was working. He was a librarian, he was a Christian fundamentalist, and he was giving me books saying that the earth is actually 5,000 years old. And all these scientists have got it totally wrong. Because science has shown us the earth is like, I don't know how many million or billion, 5 billion I think it is. But they're literally still trying to say, no, the Bible is right. Most Christians have abandoned that, They've admitted, no, yes, the Bible has been changed, we don't know who wrote it and all these things. But there's still these literalist, fundamentalist Christians that can't handle that. So this is really, subhanAllah, something amazing in the Quran. Just there's, no discrepancy. If you read any books by any human beings, human authors, you will find mistakes, because no one's perfect. One of our greatest Imams, Imam Shafi, rahimahullah, actually he wrote one of his seminal works, a Risala, on the science of Usul al-Fiqh. He originated this science as a formal subject. That you first want to write on this subject. And when he wrote his book, he said, I reviewed it 40 times, and each time I found mistakes, I changed things, and And after 40 times, I realized that no book is perfect except the book of Allah. So then he left it. And this is actually one of the wisdoms why, no other book will be perfect apart from the book of Allah. Even the books by some of our greatest scholars of the past, there's no one book, no one scholar that has ever been able to write a book which other scholars have not pointed out some criticisms, let's say. And this actually shouldn't be this shouldn't be something that should disturb us. This is actually something that verifies the perfection of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this was the thing, about these scientific things in the Quran. They're very good and very strengthening for our iman. And many people are becoming Muslim through these things now, that people are finding out so many things that are in the Quran, in the Hadith. And there's still more stuff, that we haven't even thought about, One that I actually thought of is in the Quran where it mentions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heaven with amad la tarawnaha. That this, he says in the Quran, that the heaven is supported by pillars, amad, pillars, that you cannot see. And I wondered, I'm not saying obviously, I'm not giving that this is the tafsir, but it made me wonder about the force of gravity. Because we know that the force of gravity is a very mysterious force. It's a very mysterious force. Why does the moon stay in orbit around the sun? Because there's actually a force that they call gravity, but no one really can understand what type of, how does that work? So this is a force that we cannot see, but it's all around us, which is keeping the clouds, the moon, the heavens in place. Anyway, so that was the aspect of the alaqa, the mudgha, etc. ثم يرسل إليه الملك. So then at 120 days the angel is sent. And the ruh is put into the body. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. It was one of the questions that was asked the Prophet ﷺ by the Yahud when they sent the Meccans, One of the 3 questions they said, ask him, because only a Prophet can answer these questions. 2 of the questions were answered in quite a detail about the Ashabul Kahf and about Dhul Qarnayn in the Quran. But this question about the ruh, actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave very short answer. There's مَا أُوتِيتُم مِّنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. You have only been given very little. قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. The ruh is from the amr of my Lord. And you have not been given much knowledge about it. So the ruh is something that is one of those things the human intellect doesn't have the capacity to get to the bottom of. Anyway, so the ruh is the thing which gives a life to the human being. When we die, the ruh moves into the barzakh. When we die, the ruh is taken out by the Malak al-Maut. The Malak al-Maut is the only creature that Allah created that has got the power to remove the ruh from the body. No other creation has got that power, has been given that power by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only the Malak al-Maut. So when someone is on the point of dying, he is the one that has to separate the ruh from the body. As soon as he dies, he only will hold it for one moment. As soon as he takes it out, he then gives it to the other malaika which are with him. And as soon as the ruh is separated, then it goes into the barzakh. The barzakh is the space between this life and the Yawm al-Qiyamah. So then the Prophet ﷺ said that these 4 things are written at that time. So this hadith is obviously the main focus, the theme of this hadith is about predestination. Everything is written, everything is known in the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Good question, yeah. When the ruh is taken out, Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah has got a good book about this, which is also translated into English, called The Soul's Journey After Death, which he brings the different hadiths which explain what happens. After the ruh is removed from the body, depending whether it's a good person or a bad person, different thing will happen. If it is a good and pious soul, actually that first thing will happen, it will be taken up through the heavens, to the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the heavens will be open for it, and it will do sajda in front of the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then the ruh will be sent back to the body. Not to go into the body, but it will, according to the hadith, the ruh will actually be able to see what is happening to the body. So people are washing the body, then they're taking it to the graveyard. The ruh will be watching this. And then when the body is lowered down into the grave, the Prophet ﷺ said, you will hear the people's footsteps walking away. After they have buried you, you will hear them walking away. So now the ruh will be attached back to the body, but not in the way that we are alive now. Not that we are alive, but it will be attached to the grave. It will will be attached to the grave, not to the body itself, but to the grave. Now, obviously, we don't take this in a because the barzakh is a different type of dimension. It's a different type of life, a different type of experience to where we are now. But it's like when we dream. When you dream, you can be in different places, you see all sorts of things. Time can pass in different ways, But when you wake up, maybe just a few seconds have passed. So think of the barzakh like a different realm, like in a dream, what you can experience in a dream. Because actually a dream is a window into those other dimensions, like we have around us, malaika, jinn, all of these things. They are in what you could now, in modern terminology, call different dimensions. But, the Quran refers to as samawat, for example. So then the person will be connected to his grave, and then the questioning of the grave will take place. Munkar wa Nakir will come, the two angels, they will ask the person the questions, the three, in some narrations, 4 questions. Who is your Lord? Who is your Prophet? What is your deen? They won't ask who's your madhab or anything like that. So if the person answers correctly those 3 questions, and he's a pious person, the grave will be expanded for him. He will be nur, and some people, in some of the narration says, the time will pass very quickly as well. Until Yawm al-Qiyamah for him will pass very quickly. If the person is not a pure person, from the point when the ruh is taken out, if it's a disbeliever, a kafir or a very bad person, when the ruh tries to go through the heavens, it will be not open for them. So at the first heaven, it will be thrown back down to the earth. And some of the mufassirun, they said that's where it refers in the Quran. I can't remember the Arabic now, but in the Quran it mentions about the person as if he's being thrown down, to the earth, the unrighteous person. And then he will experience afflictions and tortures in the grave that are mentioned in various hadiths. Does that answer the question, Shaykh?
One very quick question. What that qadr, that is it someone's predestination and the eventual where he ends up in Jannah, what changes that? Is it his actions or is it someone's dua or some good deeds he does? What changes that? Or is it again another thing that Allah, whoever Allah wills to be in Jannah, what changes that predestination? Is it our own actions or?
The thing with predestination is
what I mean is the one that is written on at the time the rule is
yes.
What changes that to the eventual?
No, that doesn't change. Actually, what the hadith is saying, if it is written at that time that he is from the hellfire, but the person may do the actions of the people of Jannah throughout his whole life, but towards the end of his life, because it was written that he is from the people of fire, he will change into the actions of the hellfire, and he will enter into the hellfire. That's what the hadith is saying.
Okay.
Does this suggest that one should kind of surrender himself to the fate which is already written? And forgive me for asking a stupid question if it is, but does it mean that one should not be really doing anything because the fate is kind of already decided? Even if my fate is for for fire already written, whatever I do, I will end up in fire. So how does it help?
I mean, the best answer for that is the answer which the Prophet ﷺ gave. Because actually one of the Sahaba asked him exactly the same question. It's narrated that the Sahabi asked him, Ya Rasulullah, if everything is already written, then what's the point of us doing any actions? And the Prophet ﷺ said, La i'malu wa kullukum muyassarun ila ma khuliqa lahu. No, do your actions. Do what you've been commanded to do. In other words, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. and each of you will be eased towards that which he was created for. In other words, that which he is destined for. If he was destined for hellfire or for Jannah, inevitably his life will go that way. But it's not for us to know. We don't know, what we are created for. Our job is to act. Our job is to act, obey the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and avoid the things that He has prohibited. On this subject, we can actually talk for a long time, but one of the things that Imaam an-Nawawi rahimahullah said in his Aqidah Tahawiyah, the secret of Qadr is something that not even the closest angel and not even the highest messenger can completely get to the bottom of this secret of Qadr. In other words, the secret of Qadr and predestination is one of those things which is connected to the Qudra and the Mashi'a of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the power, the majesty and the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just like none of the attributes of Allah can be encompassed by our limited and weak intellects, the secret of predestination can never be encompassed by us at a rational and intellectual level. So this is a place where we actually do taslim. We submit to the wisdom and the justice and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the closest malaika and the greatest prophets and messengers haven't got access to this knowledge, to this of the qadr, this deep sir, this deep secret, then none of us can ever get to that. Now, for a Western brought up people, this may not be very satisfactory, this explanation. Why? Because we have, not just Western, but even Eastern people who have been influenced by Western education, we have been very deeply ingrained within us to believe that the human being must know everything. Everything must accord to his reason. This is just a phenomenon of modern Western civilization. This has not always been the case that people have felt, and so sometimes we don't realize how deeply we've been influenced and ingrained by this culture. Now, we have to realize as Muslims there are places where our intellect cannot go. In fact, the Sidratul Muntaha, the Lot tree, as is mentioned, Sidratul Muntaha in the Quran, which was at the furthest place where Jibreel couldn't go any further, and only the Prophet ﷺ could go further. The ulama, they said that tree also symbolizes the extent of our intellects. It symbolizes the extent of our intellect, because beyond that is something which we can only experience with the ruh. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can't be mastered. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be encompassed by our intellect. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could be mastered or encompassed by our intellect, that means we have a type of power over Him. Like if you study any science or any subject, and they say you master it, you master it, you become a master of that subject. How can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His infinite attributes and power and majesty be mastered by our limited intellect that He created?